The river was swollen with the rains, its surface wild with silver waves that caught the light of the setting sun. Along its banks a woman staggered barefoot, her dress torn from briars, her face streaked with tears and mud, her red hair whipped in the evening wind, but her eyes were fixed on the rushing water, as if it called her name. She had carried a weight for too long, loss, betrayal, the gnawing emptiness of loneliness that had hollowed her heart. Every path she had taken seemed to lead to sorrow, and every dream she had held had crumbled in her hands. The world to her was nothing but a vast desert of pain. With trembling fingers she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to stop the chill that came from within. The river roared like a beast waiting to devour her, and she whispered to it, "Take me, end this misery." Without hesitation, she stepped into the freezing water. It clawed at her legs, pulled her skirts heavy, and soon her body was swept forward. The current was merciless, dragging her under, spinning her in circles, filling her lungs with icy liquid. She struggled weakly, but she had no strength left to fight. It was her surrender to despair, her final goodbye. But fate has a way of placing unlikely souls where they must be. From the distant field came the thunder of hooves, a cowboy riding fast, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. He had seen her shadow on the bank before she slipped into the river. Something inside him, a voice older than his years, told him this was no accident. He pushed his horse harder until he reached the edge, leapt down without fear, and plunged into the raging water. The shock of the cold cut through him like a blade, but he pressed forward, swimming against the current. He spotted her pale form flailing once, then sinking beneath. With powerful strokes, he reached her just as the river threatened to claim her forever. His hand closed around her wrist, firm and unyielding. She gasped when pulled to the surface, coughing violently, her eyes wide with terror, her body limp in his hold. He dragged her to the shallows, fighting every inch against the river's pull, until finally they collapsed on the bank, both soaked, both shivering, both alive. She turned her head away, ashamed, broken, her lips trembling as she whispered, Why did you stop me? I wanted it to end." The cowboy, his breath ragged, brushed the dripping hair from her face. His gaze was steady, fierce, but full of compassion that pierced her despair. In a low, steady voice, he said words she never thought anyone would give her. "I'll give you a reason to live." Those words struck her harder than the cold river ever could. For the first time in years, she felt a spark ignite inside her heart, a fragile ember of hope she thought had long been extinguished. She looked at him, her tears mixing with the water still running down her face, and wondered if fate had truly meant for her to be saved. The days after the river seemed blurred for her, but not in the way sorrow once had. She awoke in a small warm cabin nestled among rolling fields and guarded by the steady presence of the cowboy who had pulled her from death's embrace. His name she learned slowly, as though every syllable carried the weight of trust. He was not a man of many words, but his silence was never cruel. His kindness spoke louder than voices ever could. Food prepared, blankets tucked, firewood stacked high against the cold. Yet more than his actions, it was his eyes that unsettled her. They did not look at her with pity nor judgment, but with something rarer, belief. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised violets and gold, she sat by the fire and finally spoke of the heaviness inside her chest. She told him of the betrayals that had left her empty, of the loneliness that had gnawed at her soul until she could no longer bear it, of the crushing silence that made each day feel like an endless march toward nothing. Her voice cracked and her body trembled, but she forced herself to lay her pain bare, as though shedding it piece by piece. He listened. Not once did he interrupt. Not once did he turn his gaze away. When at last her words dwindled into tears, he stepped closer, kneeling before her. "You think the world doesn't need you," he said softly, his hands resting on hers. "But I see a woman who is stronger than the storm she nearly gave herself to. The river tried to take you, but you fought long enough for me to find you. That's not weakness, that's courage. And I'll stand with you until you see it too." His words wrapped around her, like a rope pulling her from the abyss. Each day after, he showed her reasons to live, not through grand gestures, but through simple truths. The warmth of sunrise breaking over the plains, the laughter of a foal racing clumsily in the pasture, the quiet peace of shared silence after a long day's work. Slowly she began to breathe again, not just with her lungs but with her soul. She learned that pain did not vanish overnight, but when shared with someone who believed in her worth, it no longer crushed her. And in his presence she began to believe that perhaps she was worthy of love, of life, of tomorrow. One morning, as the sun rose high and painted the world gold, she walked to the river's edge once more. The water rushed and sang the same as before, but she no longer heard it as a call to surrender. Instead, it reminded her of the day she was pulled from death and given a second chance. She turned to the cowboy who stood beside her, and with a small but genuine smile, she whispered, "You were right. I've found my reason." He tipped his hat, his lips curving with quiet pride, and took her hand in his. Together they walked back toward the cabin, not as strangers bound by a rescue, but as two souls bound by hope. For the first time, the world no longer seemed like a vast desert of pain, but a place where life still had beauty waiting to be.